Welcome everybody to another episode of Strife's Sanctum. My name is Citizen Strife, and we are knee-deep in Mega May. And Mega May started by talking about Mega Man 1. This time, we're going to talk about Mega Man X. We talked about Mega Man X on its own last year, so I felt it was right to continue going on with Mega Man X with Mega Man X2. Now, this was released a year after Mega Man X, which kind of kept with the course. Capcom was really good about, sticking with the formula and just pumping out games after one after another. And Mega Man X2 builds upon the story of the Reploids and the Mavericks, done in the future of the Mega Man storyline. 100 years later, 50 years later, something around those lines. Mega Man X tends to be the darker of the two. And again, there's more storylines. There's Mega Man X, there's Mega Man Zero, Mega Man ZX. There's a bunch of other types of Mega Man stuff, and that's really where Mega May is coming from. But as far as Mega Man X considers, the last time, Zero sacrificed himself to help X find his way to Sigma. Sigma was defeated, but these things known as the X Hunters have claimed to have stolen parts for Zero and want to use it against Mega Man X, which probably not a good thing. So they've sent more Maverick Hunters and other crap. They've sent other Mavericks after him. So another set of 8 Robot Masters and differing stages and all this other stuff. So similar setup to Mega Man X. The thing outwardly that I noticed was there's way less environmental manipulation. And for the benefits that I'd say the visuals and the music happened, I don't know if the gameplay changed so drastically that it really needed to be cut down. One of the things I liked about Mega Man X, which I said in my first review, was if you go to a certain stage, say Chill Penguin, beat that stage, stuff freezes over in another stage, so it's a little easier to handle. That's not really the case in this one, so it's more just straightforward. It's like playing a normal Mega Man game where not much changes. So realistically, it's following the boss order and not worrying so much about the environmental changes, but you still have wonky ways of getting around. You have the ride armors, you have the sub-tanks and items and things, and I do think they at least try to add a little more variety in maneuverability, if nothing else. But I don't know if it's a great trade-off. I'll see if I can describe that as I go. But we have our characters. We have X. We have Dr. Kane, who is essentially Dr. Light, but less interesting. And as stated, they have the Zero's parts. The X Hunters, these are 3 dudes who kind of spy on Mega Man and say, hey, we're going to find you, and we're going to coerce you into fighting us, and we're going to get rid of you. So they try to do that. The way they do this is after a couple of stages, they will hide in several stages and in several boss doors that are hidden throughout other stages, kind of like mid-bosses. If you're able to defeat them by, I'd say, the 6th or 7th Robot Master, or Maverick, I'll get confused as I keep interchanging them, but if you get through them all, you get Zero's parts, and it subtly changes the ending, and I'll go over that in a minute. But as before, it's a big deal to do the rundown of the stages. The intro stage, not a lot happens. It doesn't have the same chaotic feel as the intro stage from before. Like, you're shooting down a bunch of helicopter stuff. It's more of a processing plant where you're kind of going through a bunch of like jumping stages. There's a lot of these like robots that are trying to crush you in these walls. There's a robot that looks really menacing, but is really a joke that takes like tons of damage from like one buster shot. So it's a tutorial stage, so it's not meant to be the hardest thing in the world, but it doesn't have the same, oh my god, vile, feel to it. But when we get to the actual Maverick stages, that's where it gets fun. The Maverick stage that I always remember starting with was Overdrive Ostrich. And this one was cool because you get to mostly spend your time on a bike. You get to shoot down these rails while the snowstorm is happening, and you're just running through the stage. It can be a decently long stage, but they give you that motorbike for a while, and you are just running on through it. You can use, if you're able to jump fast enough, you're able to use it and jump into an area to get a heart tank against a spike wall and a spike trap. There's several other things, like you can get an air dash leg upgrade later on. You still need some other items for that, but if you're able to get through that, you get to like a missile silo. You ride a missile, you blow it up, and then you get to the desert area, and Overdrive Ostrich is waiting there. He jumps out of the background if you're off screen, so he'll kind of run way in the background, come out and jump at you. He also does this thing called Sonic Slicer, so while he's jumping around, he'll just kind of try and hit you with his legs, but every so often he'll just shoot out his weapon, the Sonic Slicer, from a standing position or jump in the sky, and then it'll fall and hit you. If you have it, you can use the Crystal Hunter attack on him as his weakness, but he's usually one of the people I can deal with normally. And you get him, you can do the Sonic Slicer. Now, just like Mega Man X, you can actually get an arm upgrade later on and do a secondary weapon attack, a charge weapon attack, and that's where the downward slices. So basically the same attacks that you use, that Overdrive Ostrich uses, you can now use, rather than have it subtly change the attack that they were doing. Following in order is Wire Sponge. Now, this is a weather manipulation, like a weather control center kind of thing. This is one of the few that feels like an environmental area, because it will shift back and forth from rain that messes with the terrain a little bit, to heat, which will overheat some of the enemies, then to normal. If you blow up the orbs, it'll stick to that weather that's on the screen. This is the only time I feel that the environmental changes affect the gameplay, unlike X. But you get through that area, you get to Wire Sponge. He'll try to climb up the building with a grappling hook and try to shoot you with a bunch of stuff. He'll keep trying to grapple you. Later on, he'll do a thing where he'll get all pissy and he'll start shaking, and he'll start shooting you with lightning. But if you have the Sonic Slicer equipped and hit him with a final attack, he'll actually be rend in half. He will be torn asunder. That is a special animation that you only get with that weapon. Otherwise, he just blows up. So you get the Strike Chain, which will grapple you to walls and grapple items closer to you. If you get a sub weapon and the charge, you get an extended chain that looks like a very big chain grapple. Next is Wheel Gator, and this is one of my favorites because it's a giant tank that's roaming the city, but it's not just any tank. I'm reminded, I think it was, what was it, either Nitro Man or Charge Man, which was like a late stage Mega Man game for the NES where you're on like a moving train. And I believe it was Charge Man, but don't quote me on it. I think Nitro was more of a car thing. But yeah, you're running through a train. Same idea here. This is kind of reminiscent of the end of Storm Eagle stage, except that it lasts the entire stage. You're just on this gigantic dinosaur or gator-shaped tank that is roaming through the city, and you're going inside it and trying to blow shit up. You can get that double shot upgrade, which if you level up the Buster Shot, it'll do a double shot afterwards. It's also what you use to charge up your sub weapons, so you'll want to get that. But the issue is trying to grab it and trying to do stuff. I think you need the Strike Chain and using some other weird items, so you gotta wait a little bit, or you can just luck your way into getting that early. Getting to Wheel Gator this is one of the more unique boss fights because he doesn't really fight all that directly. He'll every so often he'll hide under, his whole thing is he'll hide under oil that's kind of going up and down the arena. He will shoot out some wheels some saw wheels, some saw blades against the wall. So you're trying to climb up the wall because you're trying to avoid what he's doing is he will try and like gnaw you. He will jump out of the air and gnaw at you, and then you shake violently while you're taking damage. So he's trying to knock you off with the saw wheel to propel you into a jump into his teeth. So that was his attack strategy. But if you use a strike chain, you can do some damage to him, and then you will get the saw wheel. But you'll also get this double shot version, which can take a saw wheel and explode into multiple directions. Next is Bubble Crab. And again, bubbles are the most dangerous thing in Mega Man. I don't know why or don't know how, but it is. Anyway, Bubble Man is an underwater cave. And there's a lot of sub-secrets underneath. It's just like a very extended underwater cave with a lot of death pits and junk. But there's also a bunch of high areas that you have to reach to. There's these fish tank looking things that you have to destroy so that you can speed to an X-Hunter door. So if an X-Hunter is hiding there, you have to get to there fast enough before the tank leaves. But you also need to get to the tank to jump to these floating platform things that will lead you to some other tanks, and like a heart tank or a sub tank or something like that. You make it to Bubble Crab. His whole thing is filled with bubbles. He will use a bubble shield to try and ram you. If you're above him, he'll use these like electric prongs on his head and just kind of jump at you. But if you have the saw wheel, you can just kind of cut right through him, and he's kind of not all that threatening. And for that, you get the bubble stream, which is exactly as it sounds. I remember watching a guy describe it as those kids' toys where you dunk the plastic straw thing with the hole in it, and you just blow bubbles out at people. That's kind of what you're doing, and yet it hurts for some reason. And if you do the double shot, you get basically your shield. So there's always got to be a shield upgrade, whether it's in Mega Man with Leaf or the Skull Shield or something like this. Well, here's your bubble shield. There you go. Next is Flame Stag, and it's in a volcano. So there's a bunch of beetles jumping all over the place. There's these crag rocks. There's a volcano, like mid-level part where you have to race up, otherwise the thing will overtake you and you just freaking die. All of this is done with like the best song in the game. I'm a fan of metal, as I've said before, and holy fucking crap, if you haven't heard it before, check out Flame Stag's music, whether it's the original version, which is still badass, even in the 1994, not chiptune, but the Capcom, like if you've heard the Breathfire 2 or, that 1994 SNES vibe that Capcom uses, that sort of era, you'll know what you're hearing. But there's a bunch of remixes to that song that is really good. It's just the heaviest freaking song in this whole freaking game, and I love it. It's simple, and it just blows everything out of the water. So I wanted to spend some time talking about that. Once you make it to Flame Stag, he kind of just jumps around the stage. He's got a little bit of leeway up and down the sky, much like Sigma did. He's gonna try and just ram into you. But if you're standing straight, he'll just throw these fire attacks at you, what's called speed burners. But of course, his weakness is bubbles. So yeah, beat a giant flaming deer, whatever, with bubbles, I guess. I don't know. Stag, deer. Did I say steer? I'm confused. Anyway, let's move on. Best song of the game. I'm not confused about that. Anyway, Morph Moth is next. And it's a junkyard level. Sometimes you'll get that every once in a while. You'll figure out, where do you go with all this random crap that gets destroyed? Or what about robot masters that get destroyed? Take them to a junkyard. Let's do that. So a couple of sub-bosses made of junk or some old school enemies that you might find. There's a body upgrade for... I want to say it's the armor upgrade, but it's also kind of weird because it's like a full attack, like a screen clear attack, but it takes the full energy to do it. So you do a one shot, everything freaking dies, but it takes all of your energy to do it. I don't know how useful that really is when you're trying to save up to do other things. But you make it through Morphmoth's stage, and then you get a 2-stage boss fight. This was fun. He starts off in the, I want to say, larval pupa stage. I think that's how they call it. And he just he does a lot of ramming attacks on the floor, but he also does this like circular junk attack where he's like feeding a lot of junk in this like circular loop, and you have to avoid the junk. You take him to half health, he turns into Morphmoth proper, Morphmoth. There we go. And he will start shooting laser beams. He'll do slam attacks. He'll drop silk at you. Yes, silk. And you can set him on fire. In his larval form, he just kind of like burns, and you see these burn effects. It's kind of neat. Morphmoth is less affected by it, but it's still his weakness. And you will get the silk shot. The double up for that is this big ass chunk. It's just a big ass version of these silk shots. You do that. Go through that, you get to Magna Centipede. It's a nice security checkpoint. There's a bunch of like weird ass blocks that fall from the ceiling and stuff. If you hit one of the sirens, the blocks start going a lot faster. This little instant death spot if I've ever seen it. You can get crushed by some of them. You can get thrown off of a wall by some of them. There's an ambulance going across my way that's distracting me, which I hate so much. I'm so glad nobody can hear it when I love this microphone I'm using, but still, it's just like, Anyway, RE20, really freaking good microphone. Anyway, but yeah, as you go through all that rigmarole, you can find a head upgrade. What does the head upgrade do? Not a whole lot. It kind of shows off secrets of an area if it's there. It's not that great, to be honest. Magna Centipede himself, he uses Magnet Mine, but if you do a bunch of stuff, he will only be able to teleport. So cut off some of his limbs, he can only do a weird teleport like Boomer Kuwanger, but less effective. And you use a silk shot, you get the Magnet Mine. You also get a gravity well, so it looks like a giant floating orb of doom that just does more gravity damage. And then final robot master for this game is Crystal Snail. It's kind of a mining cart, like mine level slash ice level. There's a lot of ice blocks that float around and try to blow you up and try to steer you off the platforms and junk. There's a bunch of secrets. Like you take a thing of ride armor and then you try to swing it all the way across the way and then jump and then dash your way into it to try and get, I think, a heart tank or an energy tank. And then you got to go and keep getting upgrades. Actually, what? No, Magna Centipede. I think, let's see, we had the boots. Okay, I might have been confused. I don't think Magna Centipede has the upgrade. This place has the head upgrade. This is the one that you use to search for items. There we go. I had it. I had the head upgrade in both spots on my notes. I'm sure the Magna Centipede has a thing, but I'm not sure which. But Crystal Snail has the head upgrade to search for items. It's kind of meh. Crystal Snail is, his whole thing is he's kind of trying to slow the he's trying to slow the game down, and this is more like later in the fight. He will spin around and then just ram really fast. It's not as fast as Armored Armadillo though, so it's not really as effective. But again, he doesn't have that same weird weakness, I think, I think you have to kind of wait him out a little bit more. Then you can use the Magnet Mine to do damage. So it's a variation on the Armored Armadillo fight, but it's not as, like, just frantic. His weapon is the Crystal Hunter Cage. And I call it a cage because what it does is you blop out this, looks like snail goop, and it turns an enemy into a crystal so that you can use a platform to jump on things. Very useful for a later X-Hunter stage where you got to go and find this super secret weapon, which I'll describe in a minute. And you can also stop time for a little bit. So obviously, Crystal Snail stops time. Get that skill when you go. But you finish that up and you get to the X-Hunters themselves. Like I said, they'll show up as themselves in their own stages later, but they will show up as mid-bosses. They have the 3 0 parts. If you're able to get all 3 of them beat by the ends of all the normal stages, you will change the ending and 0 will survive. Otherwise, you will have to fight 0 himself, which sucks a lot. So you can skip a boss fight if you're able to save 0. But the first of these is Violin, this big burly guy. He's weak to bubbles, because of course he is, but his attack is annoying. So he'll do some downward shots from the air, but his main attack pattern is this big freaking giant mace ball on a chain and just kind of whoop, 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 across the stage in a random, and I do mean random order. It will bounce everywhere and it will fucking murder your ass. So he's really freaking tough. Surges, yeah, I want to say Surges. He's weak to the speed burner. His whole thing is he's sitting on a kind of like Bugenhagen style platform thing, and he's kind of running around the stage and he's jumping in the air and he's shooting shit in an arc every time he's floating around. So you have to avoid his platform and you have to avoid all the shots that are coming at you from different angles. Agile is the third one, and he has swords. He will just kind of do crazy streams in a straight fashion and will try and just swipe at you, or he will go to one side of the stage and then try to do this big arcing attack, which you either have to duck or jump away from, which is a pain in the ass. He is weak to the magnet mine, and you fight them again in the because these were the Wily stages, or the Sigma stages. There's extra stages at the end of the game, so there's the X-Hunter stages, and this is taking place all in kind of an icy area. So big northern cave kind of place. The ice doesn't really affect the terrain, though. It's more of a backdrop on the outside. You're mostly in a research facility / outpost that's closed off from the outside elements. The first stage is a lot of like instant death traps. So these I told you before about the first stage where these closing pillar doors that are trying to instantly destroy you. There's like 3 or 4 of them, and they are progressively harder and harder. You get through that, and you can fight Violin, who is doing the same attacks as he did before in the same fashion, but he puts these like 2 blocks at the middle of the stage, and the mace can kind of bounce off them and make it even harder to judge the trajectory of his stuff. So it's even more chaotic. He's still weak to bubbles, the stupid scrub. X-Hunter Stage 2. This one's a pain in the ass. It's an underwater labyrinth with spikes. So half of it's underwater, half of it is spikes. It's as annoying as it sounds. Speaking of spikes everywhere, Surges comes back, but he has this like gigantic machine that he uses as kind of a Wily machine in a way. It's got like these 4 gun turrets. You're trying to live on these platforms, because if you fall and you don't like take invincibility frame damage, you just die. So you're on these platforms trying to dodge all these weird versions of laser beams. Some of them are circular, some of them are straight lasers, some of them are like bouncing everywhere. You blow through them, and then you have to use the sonic slicer right at his face, which is harder to gauge than anything else, but he is doable. And then the final stage, which is Sigma stage, X-Hunter Stage 3. And this one has a lot more instant death stuff near the end. It's not as bad as the underwater stage and all the spike traps, but there is a very hard spike trap gauntlet. You have to use a lot of crystal snail and a lot of dashing to get through this area, much like in the original game, where you were able to find a secret that would give you the Hadouken, which would instantly kill dudes if you had full health and hit them with it. This will give you the Shoryuken, the uppercut, the flaming uppercut move. And this is also an instant death move. And funny enough, Agile is up in the air. He's over top of a bit of a spike pit, but if you have the Shoryuken, you can get rid of him really freaking quickly. if you can't and you take damage or whatever, his attack pattern is a bit wonky. He does these like floating platforms that fall to the ground over top some of the spikes in the middle, and they're trying to crush you, but he's also trying to do these weird shocks that are on the sides of the walls. They're shooting out missiles, and you can kind of get above them and do some damage with the magnet mine over top of those pillars, but sometimes you're missing your footing and you keep going down. So he's trying to keep you below level. You're trying to get above level so you can shoot him, with basically free reign. So there's methods of getting rid of him. If you can get the Shoryuken, he's an instant kill, because he's just right in line with that attack. Otherwise, he's a bit wonky, but you're able to get through him. But you get the boss rush, and this is the other thing that I think is a frustration of mine with Mega Man X2 versus X1, because X1 gave you, I want to say, multiple stages where you would fight through a nice stage of its own, and then a couple of the bosses sprinkled in. The final stage was like 4 or 5 of them, but it was still a stage. It just was not much of one. But there was still like the 2 stages beforehand where you're actually fighting through enemies, going through the mountain stage and doing a lot of the jumping and the hazards, and there's a lot of enemies, and it's very chaotic. And then there's some bosses. It's just a boss rush. It's just kind of there. It doesn't. I understand why they do the boss rush mechanic, but other than giving the Overdrive Ostrich ice instead of a desert, there's not really anything special to boss rushes, and I always feel it's kind of lazy as a developer, because they've proven with Mega Man 1 that they've added more, even back then, they added more to the ends of the stages. Once you get inside the checkpoints, they give you a little bit of a grind spot to go into. You're a little more fighting stuff to do. The boss rushes are not straight boss rushes most of the time. So it just seemed kind of lazy that we just plonk you into, hey, here's 8 runes, go. But you get through that, you go back to Magna Centipede stage, and you're able to face off against Zero, provided that you did not get the Zero parts. If you get the Zero parts, you can bypass it right away. What you end up finding out is after the boss rush is that Sigma survived and has reclaimed his spot as the leader of the Mavericks. Because of course he did. It wouldn't be a Mega Man game if the main lead wasn't always the final boss at the end. No, there are some differences. Rarely. But Zero will fight much like he does. If he can attack, he does attacks by himself in a cutscene. He will attack a lot like that if you're fighting against him. He does these double shots, and then he will do this long arc attack with his sword. He's weak to Speed Burner. If you beat him, normally he'll wake up and regain his senses and then punch through the floor. If you take his Zero parts, you will have a fake Zero show up. Then the real Zero will just nope out and beat the shit out of him and bypass it and chase them off. So he'll punch the floor through again. Then you'll fight Sigma, who looks kind of like Wolverine. He's got these like Wolverine claws. He's a lot taller than he was in the first game. He does a lot of crazy teleportation moves, and he just tries to claw at you in that first stage. So he uses if you use a Sonic Slicer on him, he takes a shit ton of damage. But then we get to one of the cooler things of Mega Man 2. I forget the technology they used when they did this. I don't know if it was a Mode 7 sort of thing, or a specific technology. There's an enemy, I think, in Morph Moth stage or Magna Centipede stage where it's a wireframe, like computer generated green sword, like a green and blue sword that's kind of like a hologram looking thing. That's basically what you're fighting here. You're fighting a hologram head cutout of Sigma's head, as he is a virus of sorts. He is no longer a physical form. He just has a head, and he's trying to shoot out enemies at you, and you can use them for health. He's shooting out lasers and all sorts of stuff, so you can kind of jump around the arena and do stuff. The cool way to figure out how to do damage to him is he will notify you via his color. So he starts out as green, it slowly turns into like yellowish and then bluish, and I think it turns back into it, and then there's a purple, and then there's a red. Once you get, I forget the order, but once you get to red, he starts floating around the arena, and where he stops, he's trying to kind of like consume you and do damage, like overtop you. So you got to avoid that. But he's weak to strike chain. You're able to beat the strike chain, you're able to win the game, and Sigma is done. Till the next game, which we'll get to some other day. Maybe the next Mega Man. As far as aesthetics go, I noticed this game was fairly bright. I find that Mega Man X is a darker color scheme and darker motive than Mega Man games are. Mega Man is very bright. I do think Mega Man X2 is a little brighter stage-wise than this game, than the first game was. The music is a lot brighter. There's not a lot of heavy metal stuff. I mean, there is, but it's mostly upbeat stuff. But Flamestag is fucking amazing. Flamestag is great. So it's just there. The non-environmental effects is something I'm not really a fan of. It was cool that they had the effects for the wire sponge stage, but it would have been nice if they'd added more to that. That was one of the big negatives for me. I also found there was a lot of crazy amounts of spike levels near the end. It's like they couldn't find any other way to make a thing more threatening, so they made like 2 of those Sigma stages a bunch of spike traps. And the boss rush is back. So it's just kind of there, you know. I'm not a fan of the boss rush because it's standard, but I do like the addition of the X Hunter fights. Some of the effects in the game are pretty cool. Like the time stop mechanic is pretty neat. The flame stag trying to, fly through the air. The morph moth trying to blow up, and getting burned. But he's also turning into another character mid battle, which was cool. And the Sigma head, the Sigma Virus head, is a cool technology thing, especially for that era, because you had stuff like Donkey Kong Country doing some cool stuff with the SNES hardware. This was not quite that extensive and a skill set, but it was still a cool way of using SNES hardware to try something new. So at the end of the day, Mega Man X2 isn't really my favorite because they didn't add to X. They changed it around and gave you some new stuff. You can dash through the air instead of just dashing on the ground this time, so you can do both now. But other than that, it's really just more Mega Man X, which is not the worst thing in the world. It's just not as exciting, if I can put it that way. X is an exciting change of pace from what Mega Man 1 or Mega Man OG was, that it's always going to have a place in my heart. It's one of those nostalgia biases. The second one, unless it's some blow-away success, is not going to be as amazing as the original, unless it fixes a lot of the problems that Mega Man X had. And X didn't really have any problems. I mean, it had some doofy things in it, but I don't recall anything that I can remember being just so dumb. Maybe Spark Mandrill syndrome, but even then, that's kind of funny for the sake of being funny rather than being an outright problem. If you wanted a problem, Spark Mandrill syndrome happens in X3, so yeah, that doesn't rear its head until X3, which I'll probably talk about some other day. So X2 is still more Mega Man X. If you liked Mega Man X and want more of that, you get it. So there's nothing wrong with it, it just doesn't feel as exciting. It's just a different take on the material with giving you a little bit more story to sink your teeth into, if you're into the Mega Man stuff for the story. I'm not specifically. It's kind of like the Castlevania thing, where who needs a story in a Castlevania game? It can be a fun backdrop, but that's not what you're here for. You're here to jump and shoot and dash and jump and shoot, But at the end of the day, I still would recommend playing it. I know the Mega Man X collection, the Legacy collections and, Battle Network collections and all that stuff. Mega Man is out there to be had on recent consoles, which is fun. And if you haven't played the original X trilogy, and even going into the Mega Man 4 through, at least to 5. I don't know. I think 6 is where it starts to go, but we'll get to that someday. It's worth playing all of them, except for 7. Yeah, except for 7. Anyway, that'll do it for me today. Next week, we'll continue Mega Man with Mega Man Legends. Completely different style of game. Alongside with that would be Mega Man Battle Network. Totally different style of game. And then when we're done with that, we'll get into other things. I want to say it's My Dress Up Darling is next. Give me 1 second. Because as I've stated, I'm not doing community polls until I get past the 100th episode and the 2-year anniversary. So I'm making sure to do my own thing for a little while. But let me grab the list here. And yes, it is My Dress Up Darling. That will be the next one after Mega Man Battle Network. After that will be Legend of Legaia with LeighClipse. By the time that this that episode airs, Legend of Legaia should have completely finished by then. I'm gonna bet it's gonna finish by around the end of May. So that's perfect. Like mid-June is when we're gonna release it. We've already recorded it, which is good. June 18th will be Chobits. I don't even need to rewatch that to remember all the fun I had with Chobits. I've watched that like 5 or 10 different times and I know it by heart. So probably going to rewatch it anyway because there's no reason not to rewatch Chobits because it's fun and it's great. And if you haven't seen Chobits and you're looking for something a little more lighthearted as far as an anime goes, Chobits fits the bill. And after that will be the 100th episode. I'm still kind of waiting to announce which one it's going to be. I'll probably get through Mega May before I start talking about it. But anybody who knows anything about what I'm doing probably can guess at this point, now that Chrono Trigger's been released, can probably guess, okay, which game is probably going to be the one that I'm going to talk about. There's not too many options as far as like, oh, a big spectacle, which one would I talk about? So I'm pretty sure everybody who knows me can probably guess which one I'm going to talk about. But that'll be saved for a day to actually be announced. But that will do for me. Next time you see me, we'll be talking about Mega Man Battle Network and Mega Man Legends. And we'll finish up Mega May. So, see you guys next time. Citizen Strife, signing off.